and welcome to the Week 2 episode of the Main Slate Breakdown here at Paydirt. My name is James McCool. I'm the owner of PaydirtDFS.com, and I am joined today by David Hess. David Hess is another really good industry guy. He's been around at Paydirt for a long time. He had his own site. He does a lot of coaching things, and he's just, in general, a sharp guy. So he's going to be joining me today. Last week I did it solo, and while that was fun, I do like to have somebody to riff back and forth with. So Hess is going to be joining me today to do that with me, and we're going to go game by game today. We're going to break down some Vegas totals. We're going to break down some player projections. We're going to break down some stacks. We're going to give our thoughts on the games. We're going to give our thoughts on week one. It's going to be awesome. So right before we get started, I do just want to say, if you have not been over to PaydirtDFS.com to check out all the different free research models and grab a subscription for the much more complicated and complex projection models, then you should go do that. We've been working really hard on the site, trying to make it so that it's a place that you can go and just find anything that you need to build positive quality EV lineups. So with all of that being said, Hess, how are you doing today now?
I'm doing good. I would just like to add on to that, the models and stuff are definitely 100% worth it. I've been around the industry a lot, and it's by far, I think, my favorite, not only my favorite site, but my favorite community also.
Yeah, the community is great. Discord is free now. It used to not be free. It used to be only subscribers, and we made it free starting like the beginning of the baseball season. So if you're not already in the Discord, go ahead and grab that. You can find it under the member tools over on the site. You can just go and jump in the Discord. So yeah, we're just going to get started because we have a lot of things to look at. But the same way that we did it last week, we're going to do it this week, where we're going to start with the lowest overall over-unders on the slate and then move forward into the highest over-unders. The reason for that is we can spend a lot of time on the games that are important, and then eventually we get to the end and it's like, oh yeah, well, Cleveland, New York Jets. I don't know, it sucks. Like, you just don't want to talk about it anymore. So we're going to start with Cleveland and the New York Jets, and then we're going to move forward into the highest over-unders and the most important games on the slate. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Cleveland, New York Jets is the lowest over-under on the slate. It sits at 39. The spread, Cleveland is a 6.5-point favorite. This game does look like it mostly sucks. I do think there are some interesting things here. Last week, Cleveland did not quite go as planned for a lot of people. It was Donovan Peoples-Jones who had the highest target share on the team. I think he had 11 targets. Mark Cooper did not have 11 targets. He was by far the second fiddle. They ended up beating the Carolina Panthers, which is not really great because Cleveland doesn't deserve to be beating anybody right now. But they're still a very rush-heavy team. They were 53% in the adjusted rushing category. Like, their adjusted rushing rate is 53%, which I think is the highest in the league right now. The New York Jets, on the other hand, passed the ball 61 fucking times, which is a lot. Like, a lot. Especially because that game, it's not like that game was completely out of hand, right? They passed the ball 61 times. They passed the ball in the red zone 12 times. They had by far the highest pass rate in the red zone. This is going to be a really, really pass-heavy team, at least while Joe Flacco is at QB. So what are your thoughts on this game, Hess?
Something that I think is really interesting is, there's like a lot of talk about how Nick Chubb kind of faded in the background this year as far as fantasy. And I think last game was a perfect example of why. I mean, he rushed for 140 yards, which is ridiculous, and still was nowhere near the top play. So, it kind of shows no matter how good he does, unless he scores multiple touchdowns, there's incredibly low floor since he doesn't catch, how much it really has to go right there for that to be a good play. And not that he can't be a good play. He's nice leverage a lot of the time. But I just thought that was such like a crazy thing. Like, he ran for 140 yards. Like, no one even talked about it because
Right.
it didn't matter fantasy wise.
Right. Yeah, and I will say that the Cleveland in this spot against the Jets, like, they're implied for 1.52 rushing touchdowns, which is pretty good. I mean, it's not like they're implied to score no points. Their team total is 22.75. So there might be reasons to go and look at one-offs in this game. I don't think that Chubb is the worst play because if he rushes for 140 yards and 2 touchdowns, then he's awesome.
Definitely. That's what I'm saying. I think that Chubb's one of those guys that you play when he's low owned, but you never touch when 10 to 15% is playing him, just because so much has to go right for him.
In general, I agree with that. On the other side with the Jets, uh, Michael Carter ended up actually out carrying Brees Hall, which I expected. Like I didn't think. Hess, you and I have gone back and forth about rookies for 3 months now.
He's actually one of the guys though that I put in. I had him leading the timeshare, but I had it at a 55-45 split. I didn't go with the rest of the industry for like
And
70-30.
maybe at the end of the season he gets there, but everybody talked about Michael Carter last year the same way that they're talking about Brees Hall this year.
And Michael
So
Carter's just so good.
he's
Like I don't know why they
good,
went to get Brees Hall because Michael Carter is so good. I don't feel like that's someone you can phase out of the
but
offense.
so is James Robinson, and they went and got Travis Etienne, right? I mean,
But at
it's
least
just
there, like those are two like differing skill sets. I feel like Michael Carter and Brees Hall is the same guy.
I, I can agree with that. So I just think that people are. It's this New York Jets offense is very interesting if they're going to throw the ball that many times. Even if they're only implied for 16.25.
I
You
also
know,
like Elijah Moore quite a bit. It's like a one-off.
and
I mean,
Corey
like he's someone that's
Davis.
done
But
well a lot of the time, especially with Flacco, and like it was kind of like a disappointing week one. So like ownership should probably get off him a little bit. And I don't hate going back to there as a one-off personally.
right, I think that Elijah Moore is fine. I think that Corey Davis is fine. I think that Michael Carter is fine. Like I think that there are one-off pieces to the Jets that make sense, even with such a low team total. Because if they're going to throw the ball 50 plus times, and Joe Flacco will, like he doesn't care. I think there is likely upside, even if if it's Elijah Moore or Corey Davis or Michael Carter or Brees Hall. I think any of those guys as one off makes a lot of sense. But you and I both agree not to stack this game, right?
No, but I would think that if the Jets score 20 plus points, that probably one of those guys are in the optimal.
I could see that. I could see that. So let's go ahead and move on to this next game. We've got New England Patriots versus Pittsburgh Steelers. This game, I think, is actually the worst game on the slate. I think that there are things we just talked about, some things we like in Cleveland and the Jets. That I don't like anything in this game really. I think that maybe Pat Fryermuth is interesting. He did have a very dominant amount of the red zone targets last week. I think he had 8 targets. He came second on the team in target share behind Deontay Johnson. But Pittsburgh, 54.55% adjusted pass rate. That's really low. I don't have them projected for very many passing attempts in general. I have this game with low plays overall. New England sucks. They're a tire fire of a team. Even without Ty Montgomery, it's like I don't think that I care to take shots on Ramondre Stevenson, especially when Pierre Strong could still slot in as the third back. Like, I just don't see a lot to like about this game. I don't think either team is explosive, and I don't think that either team is going to support anybody that's going to win you a GPP.
I like Deontay Johnson a little bit. I don't think I'm going to get to him very much. It's probably somewhere that like if I play 20 lineups, I might play two or three. So I don't think that it's like a priority play, but I kind of talked about it before. I use add more funds to kind of script out like a buy low model for receivers that like got a high percent of air yards, that got a high percent of the like money opportunities and stuff, but didn't play as well as they should have. And Deontay Johnson did top that list this week. So I like the idea of Deontay Johnson. I just really don't like the price point that he's in and feel like there's better plays for a singular lineup than Deontay Johnson. But I also wouldn't be surprised to see Deontay Johnson go for 35 points this week.
I mean,
But outside of that, there's nothing else that I'd want to touch.
Deontay Johnson at 5,800. Like, why
That's
am
what
I?
I'm saying. Like the price point's just so bad that like there's so many good plays there. That's what I'm saying. It's like I don't know that I'm actually gonna get very much, but it'll also be one of those things at the end of the week where like he has 38 points at 1% ownership, and I'm like, wow, like I knew that could have happened. Why didn't I have 40% Deontay Johnson?
And
But I still probably won't.
the answer is likely that you just don't need that much of him. I mean, in that range, if we're just looking at players in that range, Christian Kirk I have projected for 10 points higher than I have projected for Deontay Johnson. I have Rashad Bateman way up there. I have Cortland Sutton at 6,100. I have Brandon Cooks at 6K. Tyler Lockett, T. Higgins, DJ Moore, like
Yeah, it's a rough
I'm
It's definitely a rough little bit there.
yeah, I'm just not playing Deontay Johnson. But Pat
Like I said,
Fryermuth,
I don't actually know that I'd get to any of him. I just wanted to point out that, the things that I look
sure,
for says that he didn't do as well as he should have last week.
sure,
I still don't know if he's worth it as a play, but that, I don't hate the idea of the play.
sure.
I just
No,
probably won't play it.
I can absolutely agree with that. The only other thing that I'll note is that I do think that Pat Fryermuth, and I've said his name a couple times now, 4,400, he's in play. Like especially at relatively lower ownership, if you're not going to go up to one of the elite options of Pitts, Waller, Andrews, I think that Fryermuth is well worth the play. I have him projected pretty well. What do you think about Pat Fryermuth?
I really liked him coming into the season. So, I mean, I don't see anything that would make me dislike him outside of, having to say Fryermuth a whole bunch. Um, I think just the biggest thing with that, though, is that I think I prefer Ertz for $100 more. Um, but so does everybody else probably. So I mean, as far as a leverage play, Fryermuth makes perfect sense. Tight end's one of those spots like wide receiver that you can easily get different and do okay. I think in general, I try to stack my tight ends with my quarterbacks since it's such a bad position. But I mean, like I said, as far as a leverage play, I don't hate it for sure. I just think Ertz right there at 100, just like Deontay Johnson, kind of is that Ertz is a better play at the same price range for me.
Sure, totally agree with that. Okay, so let's move on to the next game. We've got San Francisco and Seattle. This is a 41 over under. It's pretty bad, but Seattle looked okay against Denver. Geno Smith didn't look terrible. I did have him in Showdown. I ended up almost having a sweat, but it was Jerry Jeudy over Cortland Sutton that I needed. So if I have that, I probably end up winning everything. So Seattle has looked okay. They had a really high market share of touches for Rashad Penny. Granted, they were very pass heavy. They had a 69% pass rate in the adjusted script, but they're only projected for 16.25 points, which is the same as New York Jets. San Francisco, on the other hand, it's well documented how much I think that Trey Lance is overhyped. I think that he didn't look good in week one. Granted, it was in a monsoon, but like Justin Fields looked pretty good. So I think that everybody wants to make excuses because there's so much confirmation bias and so much anchoring going on with Trey Lance, and nobody wants to let go. Uh, and I don't know that he's gonna be good. I don't know that he's gonna be good, and I don't know that he's gonna be good for fantasy. And the main reason for that is, and I'll just fucking get off my soapbox here in a second, but main reason for that is like y'all can say that he can be bad and be good for fantasy, but that only happens while he's starting. And like San Francisco knows that they are a championship roster, knows that they're a playoff and Super Bowl roster, and they have Jimmy G just like plopped right here on the bench, and Jimmy G can lead them up to the Super Bowl like he's done it before. So, I think that there is legitimate concern that Trey Lance, if things go badly in this game, that he's on like bench watch by week 4. So just be concerned about that. I think outside of that, outside of my fucking biases against Trey Lance, they're 8.5 point favorites here. There's no Elijah Moore, so it's going to very likely be Jeff Wilson Jr. season. He very likely rates out as a super good play across the industry. That a 52% rush rate in the adjusted script. They're projected for by far the most rushing touchdowns on the slate at 2.52 rushing touchdowns. So there's a lot of meat on the bone for the running backs, for Jeff Wilson, for Trey Lance, and for Deebo Samuel. I think that he's going to have a lot of rushing work this week as well. So interesting game. What are your thoughts here?
So I actually have no interest, I don't think, in Jeff Wilson since he's super chalky. I just think that, that's one of those things where Trey Lance is going to get a lot of carries. Debo's going to get a lot of carries. If Jeff Wilson scores a touchdown, of course he gets there because he's cheap. But if he doesn't, he's doomed. And I think that we just have a lot of, like, really decent cheap options like Chase Edmonds and, a couple other guys this week where, like, I don't feel like I need to go there for somebody that I think has a low ceiling as a whole because of limited opportunity with Trey Lance and Debo probably both getting 8 to 10 carries.
What if I told you that Jeff Wilson was not chalk? What if I told you that Jeff Wilson, as of
It's
right
not
now,
now?
he's projected,
That's crazy. When I looked at it earlier this week, he was like projected like 18-20%.
as of right now, he's projected at 11.57%. Chase Edmonds projected for 15. Nick Chubb projected for 12. Antonio Gibson projected for 16. Darrell Henderson projected for 20. He doesn't project chalk right now. So does that change your
Yeah, I
thoughts
mean,
on
I
Jeff
don't hate
Wilson?
it at all as like a Henderson pivot if he's less owned than everybody else. But I thought, I guess, this is the second time this week that I've given more credit to the field than I think I probably should have. um, so, yeah, that's a little different. I just kind of figured he'd come in heavily owned. The Shanahan backs usually are, especially when one gets hurt. We usually see everybody play them for weeks. Um, but, I mean, even as far as Trey Lance, so my take on Trey Lance, I don't know that he's going to be a good quarterback, but I do know that I think big plays when he starts is going to be a thing. Even if he's terrible, he's slinging the ball a lot. He's kind of, Zach Wilson, Josh Allen early, where like I think that he can easily support one big play a week, even if he's not great in games he's starting. I think last week he completed 13 passes and so had like 180 yards in the monsoon. So I really like Debo this week. I think that Debo's going to see more carries, with Elijah Mitchell hurt, and I also wouldn't be surprised that outside of the monsoon if he sees 8 targets and a couple of those are down the field. I think out of this game that Debo Samuel and I guess Jeff Wilson at 10% are the only two guys that I think I'd really be interested in.
Yeah, I have a lot of interest in Jeff Wilson here. I'm fine with Debo. He doesn't project well, but he's never going to project well because he's kind of a weird gadgety thing, and he relies on a lot of like big breakout plays, and my projections never like guys like that. So overall, looking at this, I like Jeff Wilson. I don't really like anybody else in this game. Seattle side is interesting. Like Chicago was able to move the ball last week. I don't think that Geno Smith is as good as Justin Fields. But DK Metcalf's going to be nothing owned. Rashad Penny is going to be nothing owned. So I do think that in really large fields, those guys are interesting plays.
I liked Penny until Kenneth Walker's back this week. That kind of scares me because they were giving him so much room that if he just comes in and just gets even all the goal line work. Say they use Kenneth Walker on the goal line and Penny loses that. I mean, then the ceiling that we're looking for Penny just really comes down. And as that low owned play, I don't see him getting you 25 and winning you $100,000.
Sure.
That kind of scares me. Before that, I really liked Penny here.
Yeah, I can agree with that. All right, let's move on. We have Cincinnati and Dallas. So Cincinnati is a 7.5-point favorite here. The over-under is 41. I don't think that's given enough credit to Cooper Rush. And I think it's giving too much credit to Cincinnati. Cincinnati didn't actually look good last week. They had to throw the ball like 60 times. They ran 100 offensive plays. Now, look, people in the industry are like, oh, man, yeah, this offense is blistering fast. Like, they're going to run a whole lot of plays. No, dude, like, they played like a 48 – they played for like 48 minutes. They played like 50 minutes. They had an overtime. Like, yeah, they're going to run a lot of plays if you go into overtime. I get that. They are going to be an offense that gets out there and, like, gets things going and is running fast. But I don't think you should ever expect a team to run 100 plays. I think that at most, if you want to assume that this offense runs quickly, you can project them for like 70 in a good game. And this isn't even really a good game against Dallas. Like last week, Dallas and Tampa Bay didn't do anything for an entire game. Granted, Dallas looked terrible, but I digress. I think that this is way too much. It's too much disrespect to Dallas and Cooper Rush. Cooper Rush had one spot start last year and ended up doing very, very well. In fact, Amari Cooper ended up being a Slate winner. I think he had like 7 receptions for like 120 yards and a touchdown or something like that at super low ownership. So I think that Dallas in this spot, and my betting model agrees with me here, is a much better play than 7.5-point underdog with a 16.75 team total. I think that Cincinnati is a considerably worse play. They were not efficient. They were not aggressive. If you go and look at the new aggressive throw index on the site, which is a free research model that I just put up this week, you can see that Cincinnati was not aggressive. Yeah, they had 357 air yards in the entire game, but they had to throw the ball 61 times to do it. Their average air yards per play was only 5.85, and they were 4.36% less aggressive on their throws than league average. Like, it wasn't good. So I'm pretty low on Cincinnati. How are you looking at this game?
So my hot take of the season was actually that Cincinnati's passing attack was overrated throughout the draft season. I thought Burrow was being drafted too high. I thought Higgins was being drafted too high. And Chase is Chase. I mean, so like it's not that he was high or anything, but so as a whole, I mean, kind of what we saw is kind of what I expected. I think that they run the ball a lot more than the industry wanted to act like they did. They ran 100 plays and Mixon had like 30 touches. I mean, he got a lot of targets and stuff. But he got a lot of run, and he's going to continue to get a lot of run as long as he's healthy. Um, I really liked in the beginning of the week. I thought I really liked Mixon. I think he ended up climbing up in ownership a little bit. I thought that he was going to be a decent pivot, but ownership didn't work out with me there. But I do agree on the Dallas side. I think that CeeDee Lamb and possibly Tony Pollard are both totally playable as one-offs. They're probably not priority plays for me, but if they are 7.5 underdogs and they're down the whole game, they're going to throw the ball a lot. So you would think that either CeeDee Lamb or Tony Pollard get there if they score literally anything.
Yeah, and I mean, CeeDee Lamb only projected at like 7% owned. He's 6,300. That's a good
Yeah,
price for somebody
yeah.
who.
I mean, it kind of feels like Michael Pittman last week,
Yeah,
but everybody was on Pittman because he didn't just have one catch on 11 targets or whatever it was.
yeah. I mean, CeeDee Lamb, he had a massive target share last week, and one thing that this is going to be one of those overreaction spots. We always talk about overreaction spots in week two, where Dallas looked terrible. Dak Prescott is injured, but Cooper Rush is not terrible. He's a completely competent backup. He knows the offense, and CeeDee Lamb is still really the only guy in town. And it's important to note that advanced stats are not going to like Dallas either because they literally had zero red zone attempts last week. Zero. So everybody's going to look bad from an expected fantasy point standpoint on Dallas, and I think that they're a better play probably than Dallas here.
Yeah. Because I think I really like CeeDee Lamb. The more and more we talk about it, the more and more I kind of want to build him into like 25% of my lineups.
Yeah, it's an interesting spot for sure. So let's go ahead and move on to another game that I think that is a little bit more enticing here. We have the Giants and Carolina. So the Giants are actually 2-point favorites here, which is interesting. I didn't think that Carolina looked terrible last week, and I think that the Giants mostly looked awful outside of Saquon Barkley just running wherever he wanted. Granted, that is something that Saquon Barkley can do, and I think that everybody is under the assumption that he will continue to do that, and that's fine. Like, I have Saquon Barkley projected well. I think he's a good play. I think he's fine. But really interesting here that that the Giants are going to be favorites here, 2-point favorites, when, for all intents and purposes, they don't have anything but Saquon Barkley. They were a team that was pretty rush heavy, 56% pass rate in the adjusted script. Having projected for just 0.58 passing touchdowns, though, and 1.94 rushing touchdowns. They had hardly any passing attempts in the red zone. Another thing that you can look at over on the site is red zone splits, and New York Giants only had 3 passing attempts in the red zone and 10 rushing attempts, 23% adjusted pass rate in the red zone. So, as far as a stack goes, terrible idea. Can't stack the Giants, I don't think. They're just going to be the Saquon Barkley show. Carolina, on the other hand, had a 78% adjusted pass rate across. That's the highest rate in the entire league outside of Las Vegas, who also had a 78% adjusted pass rate. They also passed relatively aggressively. I think that they look okay on the aggressive index, or I might be wrong about that. No, they look. No, they're under. They're under. I lied about that. Sorry, I was looking at somebody else. But they did pass a lot, 78%. I think that continues. It was Robbie Anderson over DJ Moore last week. One of my takes in the offseason was that Robbie Anderson was going to be somebody who was more valuable than DJ Moore, and week one confirmation bias is nice on that. But yeah, this game is a weird game. You pretty much only have interest in Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley since those are the engines of these teams, but I think Carolina's getting some disrespect here, and I think they're a better team than the Giants.
I think they're definitely a better team than the Giants. I think the Giants are mostly bad. They've been bad for a couple years ever since Daniel Jones got there. And I watched some of the game and they didn't really look better. I mean, I know they got a better outcome, but they didn't look better outside of Barkley. As far as from a fantasy perspective, I don't think that I have interest in almost anybody here. except Barkley and McCaffrey, which I like McCaffrey a lot. That's another one of those overreaction things where he didn't get the workload in week one that everybody thought that he was going to get, and ownership had dropped considerably. And I think that I want to go right back to him in a lot of places this week. I think when I can get McCaffrey as not a top 3 owner percent play, which currently he's not. I mean, I don't even see him top 10. He's like 12th, 15th. That's something that I'm always super interested in. I mean, when I can either get him cheap or I can get him at low ownership, I punch him in as much as I can.
Yeah, I'm with you. Right now, I have him projected for 8% owned. For reference, Saquon Barkley is projected at 30%. I think Saquon Barkley is going to come in at 40+% owned in most of the tournaments. Leonard Fournette projected for 13, Jonathan Taylor projected for 15, Cordell Patterson projected for 20. I don't see Christian McCaffrey even being top 20 in ownership this week. I think he probably comes in under 10%. I think that's a big mistake by a lot of the industry. So one very interesting thing that you can do is just go Christian McCaffrey instead of Saquon Barkley, and that's a pretty direct pivot that you can make. But I'm with you. I pretty much just want Saquon Barkley or Christian McCaffrey in this game. I think it's probably pretty safe to move on unless you have any other thoughts.
My only other thing is that it's really sad that the coaching staff doesn't use Tony. I would love to want Tony in my lineup this week. He's so fun to watch, but like my playing time's just horrific. It's Brandon Ayuk last year all over again.
Yeah, and the hamstring injury doesn't help that either. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on. We have a game that I am very interested in next, which is Baltimore and Miami. So Baltimore Miami is a 44 over under. Baltimore are 3.5 point favorites here, implied to score 23.75 points. Both of these teams were very high in adjusted pass rates. Baltimore was 71.43% adjusted pass rate. Miami was 72.73% adjusted pass rate. And both teams have a lot of big playmakers, right? Like, we know that the Miami offense is stacked up with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Mike Gesicki if they ever want to use him. But there were some smart people that said that he wasn't going to be used, and that's fine. And then the Baltimore side, we have Rashad Bateman, we have Mark Andrews, and we have Devin Duvernay now, who is a different kind of archetype of receiver that fills in the Marquise Brown role pretty well, I think. So one injury note, James Prosh is out this week. He had already kind of been supplanted and wasn't going to be playing much anyway. He dropped down to about the wide receiver 4. So we can probably expect a lot of Rashad Bateman and Devin Duvernay in the 2 wide receiver sets. And this game, I think that people are really, really low on Baltimore after week 1 and on Lamar Jackson overall. There was a lot of rumblings and still is a lot of talk about how he doesn't want to run this year because of the contract talks, right? They're like, oh, he only rushed 6 times in week 1. He doesn't want to rush. Look, and I wrote this up in my Stacks and Stats article, but in 2020, an MVP caliber year where he ran a lot, he only ran 7 times in week 1. Week 2, he ran 16 times. So it's just one of those overreaction things where, like, Lamar Jackson's going to do what he does best. Like, if he wants to make a lot of money, you know what he needs to do? He needs to fucking run, because that's what he does best, right? So I think that people are overreacting a lot here. This game is 2 really high pass attempt teams. It's 2 aggressive teams. If you go and look at the aggressive throw index, Baltimore is 4th in the league at 7.53 above average. And then Miami is a little bit above average at 1.97%. But both have good air yards numbers. Both pass quite a bit. There's a lot of upside to be had in this game. And I think this game could go well over the total. What are your thoughts on this game?
So you come to my knowledge now as the Baltimore guy. I feel like, every time I see Baltimore anywhere, I'm like, yeah, James is playing Baltimore. So that's really not surprising to me. This is a game that I think I'm going to have a lot as my secondary stack, but I don't think that I'm going to get there on either side as far as full stacks, just because I think that both of these quarterbacks, even when they do really, really well, they support one pass catcher most of the time. I don't have anything against playing Lamar Jackson. I still think that Lamar Jackson is one of the top fantasy quarterbacks of the year. I think that he could very well have 50 fantasy points this week, and I wouldn't blink. Just for me with what I'm doing, it kind of makes more sense to me as a secondary stack where like I think I'm gonna have a lot of Jalen Waddle, Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay, Tyreek Hill, something as a secondary stack where I might get that, 20-25%, which is, heavy for me. Um, but that it's just not something that I'm looking as so much to full stack because there's so many other spots that I think that I like just as much at low ownership that are also a little cheaper.
Yeah. The other note here, and I absolutely am the Baltimore guy at this point. Like, I'm going to write up Baltimore every single week. The other note here is J.K. Dobbins should be back this week. He's still
Yeah,
questionable, but he has practiced multiple days. I think that it mostly is just going to be like Kenyon Drake drops down to what Mike Davis was last week, and J.K. Dobbins jumps up to what Kenyon Drake was last week. J.K. Dobbins doesn't have the same receiving chops as Kenyon Drake. Kenyon Drake's can get more receiving work, but overall, I think that you can pretty easily expect 55% of the rushing work to go to J.K. Dobbins, 30% of the rushing work to go to Lamar Jackson, and then the scraps go to the other guys. Do you have any thoughts on J.K. Dobbins?
I'm not playing him, but I do wonder if it's going to bring that adjusted pass percent down a little bit because, Kenyon Drake's a guy they signed off the street, but Dobbins somebody that they invested a draft pick in and a lot of time. Obviously I don't know, and I'm not going to try to pretend like I do, but I wonder if it's going to kind of balance out a little bit from last week because traditionally we've seen them run the ball a lot more than they did last week.
Yeah, and I'll agree with that. I do think that obviously if Lamar Jackson's up running 10 plus times, that's going to eat into a lot of the adjusted pass rate. The good thing about that is that it doesn't hurt the stacks upside, right? The thing that I'll be winning six figures with this week is going to be Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, and Tyreek Hill. Like, I don't really care about having a double stack with Lamar Jackson. I don't really care about him throwing the ball 40 times. Um, I just think that his upside, people are grossly underestimating it based on week one.
Yeah, I mean, if you think Jalen Hurts is a good play, you should play Lamar Jackson. It really like comes down to that. I mean, Lamar Jackson is everything Jalen Hurts is, but better. So, I mean, if you're somebody that plays Jalen Hurts regularly, if you're playing Trey Lance, you should absolutely be playing Lamar Jackson.
100%. All right, let's go to the next game. So this is another very good game, and this one is a aggressive throw index darling. This is Tampa Bay and New Orleans. So this game is also a 44 over under. Tampa Bay only 2.5 point favorites here. It's interesting. Like if you look at the if you just look shallow, right, you see that the adjusted pass rate for Tampa Bay was really, really low. It's only 48% last week. And the adjusted pass rate for New Orleans was also pretty low, only 54.55%. And that's fair. But it's also worth saying that both these teams were extremely aggressive when they threw. So Tampa Bay ends up as the second most aggressive team in the league when it comes to when they threw in week one. They were 13.56% above league average. The only team that was higher was Chicago, and they were at 14.11% above league average in terms of their aggressiveness. New Orleans was third in the league at 8.17%. So Tampa Bay, New Orleans up against each other, second and third most aggressive teams when they throw. This has fireworks all over it, right? Especially Chris Godwin is not going to be playing. Alvin Kamara might not be playing. He's questionable and did not practice Friday, so that's never a good sign. This game kind of sets up for having a lot of upside for the main pieces. Now, last week took a little bit of luck and some garbage time luck from New Orleans guys to get there, but obviously Jameis Winston is still a very high upside quarterback. He has been for his entire career. Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry are going to have good ceiling games this year, and this is a spot where I think they can have it. Tampa Bay's defense is not some vaulted thing. Like it's good, but it's not something that's incredible. New Orleans defense is not incredible. They have Marshawn Lattimore, but then outside of that, they're pretty much just league average in most metrics. So I think this game is another one that I have a lot of interest in kind of this mid-range of over-unders. That the last note that I'll say here is both of these teams were also pass-heavy in the red zone. Tampa Bay projected for 1.63 passing touchdowns, and New Orleans projected for 1.55. So what are your thoughts on this one?
This game started out as an early week favorite for me. I kind of thought that, because Tampa Bay disappointed last week on Monday Night Football, that a lot like Dallas, that people would be underweight on them. Then the injury news came out and everything, and they kind of vaulted up to where like they're one of the top owned stacks at this point. I think they're top five, which surprises me because like we had so many overreactions to bad teams, and bad players that I really thought that Tampa Bay should come in under owned. But apparently, we're the only people that care about advanced statistics out of the entire field, so nobody cared that they didn't throw as much as we thought they would. But I do really still like the New Orleans side. Tampa Bay went up in projection, but New Orleans didn't. So I think something like Winston, Juwan Johnson, that's somebody that got a ton of tight end work. He's super cheap. He's going to be probably kind of owned because I think RG's probably talked about him a little bit. That's where everybody goes. Um, but there's Juwan Johnson, there's Michael Thomas, there's Jarvis Landry. I think all three of those guys are great plays, especially if Kamara misses. And I really like the idea of bringing it back with Leonard Fournette instead of Mike Evans, who that kind of gives you the leverage on the chalkier passing game options and everything, and really fits in well with the stack. So that's something that I am really interested in this week, but I think less interest in the Tampa Bay passing attack since a lot of people are going there, and they already didn't look the best last week. Yeah, they're aggressive, but they're missing all their top options, and I think that Fournette kind of fits in better with what I like to look for when I'm doing stuff like this.
Yeah, I personally think that even after gushing about the aggressive throw index and everything like that, I do think that Leonard Fournette is the best play in this game, by like a pretty decent amount. He does not project for a lot of ownership. Projects for 13% ownership as of now. He does have the highest LevX on the slate as far as running backs go at 19.74%, meaning that LevX thinks that he should be deserved of 33% ownership. So if you don't know what LevX is, go grab a subscription. You can look at it, all of those different things. It tells you who's over and undervalued. But yeah, Leonard Fournette, I think it's 6,700 especially. Like that's just a bad price. That's as bad as the Saquon Barkley price, possibly even worse. So I do think that Leonard Fournette is the best play. I do have interest in this game in terms of stacking, but very likely it comes as secondary stack, right? Like I think that there are much better quarterback options than Tom Brady and Jameis Winston. They're just not throwing a whole lot on either side. The adjusted pass rates are very, very low. Even if they're aggressive, I think that just speaks to, if I want to have a secondary correlation of Mike Evans and Michael Thomas, I prefer that over having a full stack here, just because I don't think that either side is going to pass enough to really supplant some of the other quarterback options that I have that project better.
Yeah, I mean, real quick before we skip, I do think ideally the best thing for me if I was hand building would be like Leonard Fournette and Juwan Johnson. Or like Juwan Johnson's like super cheap. He's a converted wide receiver. He's going to be probably kind of chalky, but not super chalky. And just gets a lot of leverage on that game that's going to be chalkier than it probably should be. Not that it can't go off. Like I said, I started this game. I like the game. I like the game a lot. But it just ended up with more ownership than I thought it would have. So, kind of grabbing Juwan Johnson or Jarvis Landry with Leonard Fournette leverages both sides of that a lot of people are going to be on, and makes a lot of sense, I think, as like a secondary stack also.
Absolutely agree with that. Let's move on to this next one. We have Indianapolis and Jacksonville. It's 45 over under. Indianapolis, only 3.5 point favorites here. This game is interesting. So we have a lot of injuries for Indianapolis, right? Alec Pierce has already been ruled out. Michael Pittman is questionable with some sort of quad injury. And then on the Jacksonville side, we're pretty much healthy, I think. But those two injuries for Indianapolis are really, really interesting, right? So if there's no Michael Pittman, then who the fuck do you even use on Indianapolis? And the answer is you probably don't, right? I just think that when it comes to this team, I guess it would be Paris Campbell you'd go to. I don't know.
We're going to disagree here. I can feel it.
No. Look, I get it. I just think that Matt Ryan's bad. At this point in his career, I just think that Matt Ryan is bad. So, I already don't trust the Indianapolis passing attack all that much. And so if it's going to be Paris Campbell, who's like a career backup and a career wide receiver 3, not even a wide receiver 2, but like a career wide receiver 3.
He's actually never got to play. He's been hurt.
I get it. But I just think that, it's hard for me to want to go there. But that being said, they were pass heavy in the red zone last week. They're implied for 1.45 passing touchdowns and only 1.25 rushing touchdowns. So that's a little bit interesting when you have Jonathan Taylor back there. Speaking of Jonathan Taylor, he did have quite a few targets. I think he had 7 targets, led the backfield last week, even over Nyheim Hines. On the other side, oh, and I'll also note that Indianapolis 54% adjusted pass rate, um, pretty low, but that's to be expected for Indianapolis. Jacksonville, on the other hand, 77.27% adjusted pass rate, very very high, like third best in the entire league, I think. And this tracks with what they were last year. They were super super pass heavy last year, and that has carried over. It looks like into this year as well. Even with Travis Etienne back and James Robinson back, they're a team that wants to pass the ball significantly more. They went out there, they bolstered down their receiving options. They went out and got Christian Kirk. They got Evan Ingram. Made great use of Christian Kirk last week. They have a pretty good receiving core there now as well, and it looks like Trevor Lawrence is good, maybe great. We'll see in terms of his fantasy upside and potential. So, what's your read on this game?
So Jacksonville is actually my second favorite stack on the slate. It's not that I want to stack Indianapolis. It was just that I was really okay with having all of those pieces back. Um, I think that ETN is a overreaction. Again, he would have had two touchdowns. He had that one that he dropped, and then the one that Trevor Lawrence overthrew him. If he would have caught both of those, it'd be a completely different thing. Even the fact that he didn't play a lot of snaps, he had a lot of high value opportunities in the red zone and through the passing game, where I think that you could easily play. Lawrence, Etienne, and Kirk or Ingram. There's a lot of guys there that are still super cheap for as decent as they looked, and they put up a lot of points. This is kind of a two bad team spot where, I really like to come back with Jonathan Taylor, actually. We talked about earlier where, Jonathan Taylor saw 7 targets last week. That's something that we never see. And even at 10K, if he's getting 7 targets, I mean, that's amazing. I mean, he's really, really expensive if he's going to be chalky and he's only going to run the ball 30 times where you need 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. But even at 10K, I think that, if he catches 4 or 5 balls for 50 yards and runs for 120 yards and a touchdown, he can still get there. And with Pittman hurt, you have to think that they're going to run the ball more, which is crazy already. I mean, but just like you said, there's nothing there except Paris Campbell. So, I would have to think that they're going to try to run the ball more than they did, which, like I said, is insane because they run the ball a lot. But I really liked Paris Campbell pre-Pittman. If he's going to be super chalky, I don't know if I love him. But, when we had Alec Pierce out and he was going to slide in there at the wide receiver 2 spot at, no ownership, I really liked coming back with Paris Campbell in this game stack. But I'm not so sure if he's going to end up getting a lot of ownership. I almost feel like at that point you want to go Taylor and Hines and, just hope that one of them catches, 5 to 8 balls. But as far as Jacksonville, I love Jacksonville as a full stack this week.
Yeah, I'll note that Jacksonville is my fourth highest projected stack this week overall. The stack that the algorithms like is Trevor Lawrence, Christian Kirk, and Zay Jones, which I think is fair. One last note, and then we'll move on. Is it crazy to really like Nyheim Hines if Michael Pittman's out? Right, like because
No,
he's kind of similar to that Tony Pollard role where they love his pass catching ability and they make sure to utilize his pass catching ability. Like I could see him being utilized out in the slot or just like having both him and Jonathan Taylor on the field at the same time because if they're completely down, if Michael Pittman misses, if Michael Pittman plays, fuck this play. Don't even consider it. But like if Michael Pittman is out and they're down to just Paris Campbell, I think Nyheim Hines could get 10 targets in this game.
the role that comes to mind for me is Antonio Gibson last week. I think that they could use him very similarly to how we saw Gibson played last week, where they're running routes out the backfield. He played in the slot a little bit. They had multiple running backs in at a time, just because when you're out of weapons, somebody as smart as Frank Wright, he's going to get the best players he has on the field as much as possible. And Hines would definitely be up there with no Pittman, no Pierce, no none of that. Like I said, I kind of want to reiterate before we go off of this, though, that I think my favorite play in this whole game is Travis Etienne. I won't be a bit surprised if he scores like 2 touchdowns this week and it's up there. He's still super cheap, and I think he's going to come in really, really low owned because nobody cared about the opportunities he had. They only cared that James Robinson played more than they thought and he won the bell cow.
Sure, that's totally fine. Large field play, I think that's totally fine. All right, let's go on to this next game. We got a couple more to cover before we hit some chalk talk. So This next game that we have is going to be the Rams versus Atlanta, and the game betting model is drunk here. Game betting model likes Atlanta outright, uh, and there's reasons for that. Okay, there are reasons for that, and we're gonna talk a little bit about Atlanta because Atlanta has Hess in a fucking chokehold too. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. But overall, this game has a 46 over under. The Rams are 10-point favorites here. Implied to score 3.13 touchdowns. They were pass heavy in the red zone. 2.09 expected passing touchdowns. Just 1.04 expected rushing touchdowns. They were pass heavy overall. 69% adjusted script. Atlanta on the other side here. Implied to only score 18 real life points. They were more run heavy in the red zone, 1.34 expected rushing touchdowns, only 0.67 expected passing touchdowns. But here's the thing, and I talked about this a little bit in the Discord. Marcus Mariota ran a lot. I think he had 12 rushing attempts last week. And this offense looks like it's pretty condensed. Just Marcus Mariota, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts. And then, you're going to have a little bit of was it Brian Edwards, I think, as the wide receiver too. You're going to see him a little bit. But then also you have Cordero Patterson, who's just doing Cordero Patterson things in week one. He's the lead running back. He also racked up quite a few targets. I think he was top 4 or 5 on the team in target share. Atlanta kind of looks like Baltimore light a little bit. And I obviously, as a Baltimore guy, have to acknowledge that looks pretty good. So, one last thing here, since we're getting into the games that matter. The Rams look bad in week one. Allen Robinson got 1 target. Cooper Kupp did Cooper Kupp things, which, of course, he's going to. But eventually there's going to be a point where a team is like, hey, just stop him. And they can't do anything. Because it's true. They can't. Allen Robinson looked really, really bad. Ben Squanerick is not a league average wide receiver. Tyler Higbee is fine. He's an okay piece. And then the only other thing here is that Darrell Henderson projects to be heavy chalk. In a spot where they are 10-point favorites against Atlanta. I get that. I totally understand why he's chalk. But he does look to be chalk. So a lot of things to consider in this game. A lot of really interesting angles. What is your take on this game?
So, like you said, I've actually been, I think, one of the first people on Atlanta as a usable piece this season. I really like the way that I saw them using Mariota in the preseason. He was running a lot then. I've always been a big Drake London guy. You're famously not, at least within the community, not big on rookies, but especially first-round rookies for me. I think that all rookies have a role, but how big of a role that is, at least a role in mind. Maybe they're not good enough to get to the role in mind that they had for them, but when they were selected, the people that took them had an idea of how they wanted to use them. But with the first round rookies, there's a little more pressure than that. So they wanted to get them in earlier and more often. And so I'm never afraid to take first round rookies, especially early on in the season. Jahan Dotson, Drake London. I love Drake London in the pre-draft process. He was my wide receiver 1. I thought this was the best place for him. And, I've been calling them, Dollar General Baltimore for, the off season. I do think that if you play Atlanta, it makes more sense to skinny stack them like we do Baltimore, where you take one of Pitts or London, not both. There might be some games where they both get there, but probably not very many. But what I really like about them is that you get the Baltimore offensive style, but they're way cheaper than all of Baltimore. You can play Mariota and London for like $11K. And with the other side, if you think Allen Robinson is a good play, there's no reason why you shouldn't be taking Cam Akers over Darrell Henderson. Which I'm not doing either of those things, I don't think. I think if I'm playing Atlanta, I'm just running it back with Kupp because they're so cheap. Sure, Kupp's like uber chalk, but like within the stack with the low owned Atlanta, I don't hate it. I probably wouldn't play him as like a one off. But I don't hate bringing back Kupp with Atlanta stacks. I don't think I want to play any Darrell Henderson, though, because I'm not convinced that Cam Akers isn't going to still be 1B. We've been hearing 1A, 1B all season, and I'm not convinced that we don't see them with way more of an even split this week. So while I'm probably not playing Cam Akers, I don't think he's a good play. I also don't think that Daryl Henderson is a good play.
Yeah, I'm mostly in line with all that. I think if you're gonna play Cup, the way that you play him is in an Atlanta stack. Because there's no reason why Marcus Mariota and Kyle Pitts can't score 70 combined fantasy points. Like, there's no reason why Mariota can't run for 2 touchdowns and pass for 2 touchdowns and score 30 plus fantasy points. There's no reason why Kyle Pitts can't have 9 receptions on 11 targets for a touchdown and 110 yards or something. Like, there's no reason not. I think that those guys are just as good of plays as some of the other stacks on the slate, and I don't mind them as a skinny stack. Will I personally get there? Probably not. But I do think that if you have 20 lineups, if you have 50, if you have 100 lineups, like, you should be on Atlanta stacks, almost for sure. As far as the Daryl Henderson thing, I have him projected fine, I think. Yeah, I mean, I'm projected fine. 20% owned. I think that as it comes down to it, it's like there are other chalk pieces that I like more than him as chalk. Like, I'd rather play Cordero Patterson than Daryl Henderson. And they're basically the same price on DraftKings. Like, Cordero Patterson
Yeah,
is 6K.
when it came back, I was going to say like I don't like Patterson in the stack, but I like Patterson as a running back play a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
I
I
don't.
don't think the 5 targets that he gets really equates to you want to play him with Marcus Mariota. So like when we were talking about the stacks, I didn't mention him, but like I love Cordero Patterson just as a play on his own, as far as a one-off this week as well.
Yeah, I think he's a better play than Daryl Henderson, and they should probably come in somewhere around the same ownership. So there's a lot of things to like here. The last note, and then we'll move on, is that I do think that Allen Robinson is going to be fine. I did some study after the Thursday night football terrible fucking showing. And I looked at starting wide receivers last year and the year before that had just 1 target in one of their games, and they ended up averaging like 5 targets per game with an average max of like 8 targets per game and scoring 5 touchdowns on the season. Like,
Robinson also got 2 targets. You got
right,
one more on the last drive of the game.
right, but like 1 reception. Sorry, one
Yeah.
reception. Um,
Yeah, I mean, one of the craziest things to me here, though, is how chalky the Rams are projected to be this week, all around the board. I mean, they were horrible on national television last week. Cooper Kupp's the only person that did anything. Stafford looked terrible. Allen Robinson looked terrible. Darrell Henderson got a lot of touches, but he didn't really do anything. I mean, so, like, for this being, like, a bad-looking team that we also are really murky about, we don't know where Allen Robinson's going to end up. We don't know where Darrell Henderson and Cam Akers is going to end up. Higbee had, like, 11 targets and 6 fantasy points, which is ridiculously bad. So, like, the fact that this is the second most owned project team in ownership projections just tells you how bad the field is, really. I mean, like, could it end up working? Sure. But, like, it shouldn't be to where, like, this is what everyone wants to bet on this week.
Absolutely agree. All right, let's go ahead and move on. This next game, this is going to be another game where we have a lot of running back ownership, and this is Denver versus Houston. Denver 10-point favorites over Houston, implied to score 28 points. This is basically the exact same situation that we have with the Rams. The only thing here is that I think Houston is actually bad, whereas Atlanta I think is probably going to be okay. They're going to be pretty good for fantasy, and they might actually be a league average team. But Denver looked. They lost to fucking Seattle. They lost Seattle. They lost to a Geno Smith-led team that is a run-heavy team led by Pete Carroll. Granted, they looked fine when they were doing things that they should be fucking doing. They looked fine when they were trying to pass the ball downfield, but it took a quarter and a half for Russell Wilson to target a wide receiver. Like, it literally took 15 game minutes for him to target a wide receiver. I don't like that at all if I want to stack Denver. He targeted Javonte Williams 12 times. Now, I watched the game because I watched the Island games, and Javonte Williams, every single drop back that he was in, he would do a rub out into the flat. Every single time. Now, I don't know if this is because they expected a heavy pass rush from Seattle and they just like wanted to scheme him out there and get him out into the flat up against a cornerback because they knew the linebackers were going to be blitzing, or if this is just going to be a thing all year. But dude, if this is the thing all year, Javonte Williams might lead the fucking league in targets. Because every single time it was just like, oh, he's right here. He does a little rub, goes out in the flat, and then Russell Wilson just like, oh, well, dump. Like every single time, just dump off, dump off, dump off, dump off. Javonte Williams, I don't think ran a single route past the line of scrimmage. Maybe he had like 2 or 3. Didn't run past the line of scrimmage. So I think Denver looked really fucking bad from an upside standpoint. Sure, Jerry Jeudy got there on like a 67-yard touchdown, but outside of him, like, things looked pretty bad. And also, Javonte Williams got out-snapped and out-carried by Melvin Gordon, and I think that that is exactly what I expected to happen coming into the season. I just didn't expect 12 fucking targets for Javonte Williams out in the flat. So Denver's an interesting situation. They had an adjusted pass rate of 61%. They were very pass heavy in the red zone, super pass heavy in the red zone. Only 2.5 expected passing touchdowns for Denver. Only 0.63 rushing touchdowns expected. So it's an interesting spot. I don't think I want to buy this offense, even as 10-point favorites against Houston. What's your thoughts on this game?
So I think we disagree on Denver. I came around to them late in the week, actually. I don't think that this is the spot for them. I do want to say that. Like, I think that there's going to be a time where Denver's going to come in super low owned in the early parts of the season, where they're going to score a ton of points, and they're going to be a week winning stack. I don't think that's this week. What I like about them is that they were this pass heavy, and it's such a low scoring game. Even if the targets didn't go where we wanted them to, Russell Wilson threw the ball 42 times in a 17-16 game. So, like, I just think in a shootout style game where these offenses are actually scoring back and forth in two high offenses, it's not Houston, obviously. It could be, but probably not. That we're going to see this happen in a lot of different ways. Both receivers still saw 7 targets apiece, which is not bad for something where they, like you said, they didn't get targeted till the second quarter. Albert O comes in really cheap pretty frequently. He saw, 5 or 6 targets. I think that this is an offense that could put up a ton of points this week. It's probably not something that I'm intentionally going for if I'm only making 2 or 3 lineups. But at the same time, as a whole going forward, I think that there's going to be like a Denver, Kansas City, Denver, Chargers, whatever game like that, where I won't be a bit surprised to see Denver really put up points and everybody to go off kind of how we expected.
Yeah, and I will say I have a lot of Denver in best ball. I have a lot of Cortland Sutton. I have a lot of Russell Wilson. I have a lot of Alberto. I think Alberto might be my most owned tight end. Maybe a little bit behind Zach Ertz, but like I have a lot of Denver. I want them to be good, and even with me being low on them, the aggressive throw index does have them as well above average. They were 5.26% above league average, 6th best in the league in terms of aggressive throws. So I don't know. There's just something. It's just that intuition that I have where like I'm super, and this is coming from a place like I said. I have a lot of interest. I have a lot of vetted interest in Denver to do well and to be aggressive this year. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just panicking a little bit, but I do agree that they will be a good offense this year. I think they will be good. I think that Cortland Sutton is an incredible play every single week. I think that he's basically DK Metcalf this year. There's a lot of things like. How do you feel?
I mean, just what else? What else can we ask for in a low-scoring game? Though he threw for 340 yards, he threw 42 times. Like I said, I don't think the target tree was amazing, but like, I just think about it in a shootout. Like there could just be so much upside. I feel like even with what we saw, like maybe this isn't the week,
but
I'm just curious what you see that makes you not like them as a whole.
So you just asked what more can I want, and then you said that the target tree wasn't great. I could want.
But 7-7 is still not terrible. Right. Like we're not talking like Allen Robinson 2-4. Like 7-7 is okay. It's just not what we wanted.
It is okay, but I think in that position, from what I saw, based on like the way that they went about things, and again, I have them as my 5th best stack on the week. Like I'm probably gonna come around to a Denver stack. I just needed to hear a little bit more, right? Like.
Actually, I was just curious. This was just actually like a pure curiosity thing because I extremely respect your opinion. So, I mean, and you look at a lot more stats than I do a lot of what I do is game theory. I started looking at them because Javonte Williams had a high ownership, and I was like, is this really that bad of a leverage stack here? And I was like, I don't think it is. Like, this wasn't something that I went to look for this week. So, I was just curious on your actual thoughts and maybe what you saw there that made it to where maybe I should second guess myself.
It was just weird, and like it's because I watched the game. It was just weird seeing the way that they basically said we're not gonna try to stretch the field until we have to. And I think that as 10-point favorites, like they should not have been behind in last week's game. I think that Nathaniel Hackett expected to be like leading that game or like, not having issues that he had throughout the game. So I think that they came out with this really conservative, like short throw game plan and expecting to be able to just like keep it short and keep game control. And they did. They did those things. They should have won the game if not for 2 fumbles on the red zone, like on the goal line. And I think I'm just worried that in games where it's going to be a shootout, Denver is going to be awesome. But in games where I think that they have control, I just think that I just don't think that they're going to be as aggressive as they were in week 1. But again, this is me going against the stats. I might end up with a Denver stack this week. I almost certainly will end up with Cortland Sutton exposure. So it'll be interesting. I just... The big thing here is not even, we haven't even fucking talked about Houston, and we will here in a second. But the big thing here is what you do with Javonte Williams. And for me, like with the Paydirt projections, I have Javonte Williams projected relatively low for his price point. Like he's around kind of the same guys. He's around Ezekiel Elliott. He's around Antonio Gibson, James Conner. Like he looks okay, but he's going to be really chalky. And if he doesn't get a 30% target share again, his outlook isn't really great. Like they use Melvin Gordon more in the red zone than they use Javonte Williams. And if it weren't for the 12 targets,
I'm not playing any Javonte Williams. I have 0.
Yeah, if it weren't for the 12 targets, like Javonte Williams has a shitty game Thursday Night Football. So I'm just, that's the thing that I think is most interested in, is most interesting and something that I think is very important for this slate. So.
Yeah, I personally hope that Denver is mediocre until week 4. So that way they come in no ownership when they play Vegas. Because that Vegas-Denver game would be amazing if we get Denver at projected ownership now.
Yeah, I can agree with that. So let's give some thoughts on Houston. Dameon Pierce ended up being supplanted by Rex Burkhead week 1. Rex Burkhead ended up being the quote-unquote feature back or whatever. I don't think that continues, and I'm low on Dameon Pierce, right? Like he's a rookie, and a rookie on a bad offense, especially. So, I think that Dameon Pierce is going to surpass Rex Burkhead, soon, like before week 5. I think he's probably going to be like the back that we want to play, and he's fucking cheap. He's 4,700. So. Like he's gonna have 0 ownership this week. I think the people are likely gonna overreact to the Rex Burkhead thing. I'm not gonna play him. I'm just gonna play Jeff Wilson Jr. because I'm not an asshole. But like I think that if you are an asshole and you want to consider Dameon Pierce, what are your thoughts on that running back situation back there?
So I think my issue with Pierce is he's never gonna be a running back I want to play. Even if he's the guy, I don't think that Burkhead's targets are gonna go away. That's kind of really important. So even if we're looking at Pierce getting like a 50% rush share and like 3 targets a game, that still doesn't feel like a league-winning play that I want to go to. Like you play him in fantasy football at that point probably, but like I don't think I want to bet my bankroll on that. So like unless Burkhead were to get hurt, where we're talking about Pierce getting those 8 targets like Burkhead got on top of becoming the top running back, I don't think Pierce ever gets you there to win a huge GPP. Or I mean, not never, but slim. Maybe 1 3-touchdown game in a year, maybe. But he's a 4th-round rookie, so like, is he really capable of 3 touchdowns in a game? Because like, if Dameon Pierce got drafted, no, I was not a Pierce guy. No. Before you even get there,
I will be interjecting here because you can't say he's a 4th-round rookie when who
but
else?
You can because
who else
so I was going to say, so like,
that was drafted in the 4th
but like,
round
if he got drafted to a good offense. A 4th-round rookie on a good offense with opportunity is different than a 4th-round rookie on Houston.
I agree
If
with you.
Brian Robinson would have got drafted on Houston, I wouldn't like him. If he would have been there with Taylor Heineke as the starting quarterback, I don't like him. It's the opportunity on maybe a good offense. If we're talking about Pierce on Kansas City, where like all he has to do is supplant, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I love Dameon Pierce because like anybody can score on Kansas City. But a fourth round rookie on Houston, of all things, like, does the talent overcome a terrible offense? Probably not.
I can.
Like I said, I
I
think
just
all these
wanted. I
things are
just
just
wanted
really
to.
subjective.
I just wanted to poke the bear. I get it.
I know, I know. I saw it on your face. I was like, no, 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 no. It's subjective here.
Anyway, we don't need to talk too much about Houston. They're 10 points
No, not at
underdogs,
all.
and I don't really care about them. So Denver's
People
in
will
an
play
interesting
Brandon
spot.
Cooks, which probably shouldn't.
Right. Let's move along. Next game that we have here is the second highest total on the slate. It is Detroit and Washington, and we both have a lot of interest in Washington. I have less interest in Detroit, but we'll talk about that a little bit. So, over under here is 48. Washington was a 63% pass rate in the adjusted script. Detroit was 53%. Red zone usage was a lot of running for Detroit, implied for 1.78 rushing touchdowns, only 0.99 passing touchdowns. Flip that for Washington. Washington was very pass heavy in the red zone, implied for 2.17 passing touchdowns, just 0.43 rushing touchdowns. A lot of people have interest in the Detroit side of this. Like, Detroit looks to be like the third or fourth highest on stack this week, which is hilarious that people are going to be stacking with Jared Goff. And I'll like expand on that. But I have a lot more interest in the Washington side. The Washington side passed more in the adjusted script. They passed more in the red zone. I think that they have better receiving options than Detroit. I think they have a significantly higher upside quarterback in Carson Wentz. The Washington side looks really good from a stacking perspective. In fact, they are the third highest projected stack that I have in my stack ranks. I understand from the Detroit side why people are into it. Amon-Ra St. Brown, TJ Hawkinson, and DJ Chark were a very skinny target tree. All three of them very easily lead the offense in targets and target share. And that's very likely to continue throughout the rest of the year. Some injury notes here. DeAndre Swift was dealing with an injury thing that he apparently sustained.
Was dealing with an injury.
What? Say that again?
Said he's always dealing with an injury. I
Yeah,
don't really remember the last time that DeAndre Swift was not on the injury report.
yeah. Well, he had an ankle thing or something week one, but he's gonna play. But I think it is worth saying that Jamal Williams had a really good role week one. And this is coming from somebody who does not have a lot of him in best ball. I passed on him quite a bit, but he had a really good role in week one. He did end up with 2 touchdowns. Now, granted, he's not going to have 2 touchdowns every week, but he was utilized a lot in the red zone. And one thing that we know about offenses is that they script out, they have a different playbook for the red zone. So red zone usage is very telling of what they want from their guys. And DeAndre Swift was just not used in the red zone very often. And I think that's worrisome for DeAndre Swift's upside. Granted, he did have a lot of rushing yards, and he's still going to get quite a few targets. But if he's not getting touchdowns, that's going to hurt his upside a lot. So Detroit side is, I think, more cut and dry than the Washington side. Washington side has more options that they can utilize. Jahan Dotson scored 2 touchdowns on like 5 targets last week. That was super fluky. But he's still going to be involved. Curtis Samuel had 11 targets. Terry McLaurin only had, I think, 4, maybe 5. He had 4. And Logan Thomas was involved as well, which was a surprise. We didn't expect him back until week 3 or 4. So, but this game looks really good. I have Washington projected very well. They project really well in terms of passing touchdowns. So, what are your thoughts on what side looks better here?
So, as a 25-year-old Washington fan, it actually terrifies me to tell you that I have a lot of Washington today, and I believe, or this weekend, and that I believe in them. Because I never believe in them. Usually by week 2, I'm ready to not watch any more games. They're miserable most of the time. But, I mean, that was just a different offense than we've seen in years. I mean, that was the best offense last week that I've seen Washington run since RG3. And I think that it looks like a really wide target tree, and maybe it is as like a whole in the season. But, like, how many games do we really think Terry McLaurin gets 4 targets? I mean, so really, it feels like if you stack Washington, you start with McLaurin, and then just take whatever else fits in your lineup. If you need the cheap guy, you go Curtis Samuel. If you need a tight end, you take Logan Thomas. I mean, I really don't think it's as hard as it's being looked at, especially if this is a team that's going to throw the ball as much as they did last week. Everyone's going to get their little piece. But I think that, just taking Terry as your top guy is pretty much just what you do. I mean, he's been one of the alpha wide receiver ones in the league with terrible quarterback play since he's been here. And I mean, I think Terry McLaurin is probably one of my favorite players in the whole slate.
Yeah, this week is Terry McLaurin week. Like
I mostly agree with you on the Detroit side. Jared Goff is a low upside quarterback. We have lots and lots and lots of tape and lots of stats, and we've pretty much seen what Jared Goff is, and he probably has like 30-point fantasy games in 5 years. He's just not that guy. So, like, to bet on him being the top overall quarterback at his price point for even $1 million or whatever you're playing for is just not wise. I do like that it's a skinny stack side, but I think I really like DJ Chark this week. I think DJ Chark is my guy there for these Washington stacks if I'm hand building. He saw 8 targets. They were high opportunity targets. He scored a touchdown. He's getting like no love despite that. He should come in as the least under-owned guy on that team. And, he played just as much as, everybody else. And on your Swift thing, I don't think Jamal Williams, if they're both healthy, is ever somebody I want to play. But he also makes me considerably not want to play DeAndre Swift more. So, like, when I did my projections and everything, I kind of took some flake because I had DeAndre Swift 17th. And it's not that he's probably going to finish 17th, but it's that it's going to be the big spike weeks where, like, he's hyper efficient, but he doesn't get the touches as everybody else that's up in that tier. So, like, he probably won't finish that low, but he's not going to consistently be a top 5, top 10 piece either. So, like, as long as they're both healthy, it just feels like something that I don't flip the coin on at the price and ownership that Swift consistently gets.
Yeah, I'm with you. I had Swift really low. I mean, I must have had him like running back 20 plus or something. Just because I expect the offense to mostly be bad, because it's Jared Goff and they're going to be run heavy. And the thing about DeAndre Swift is the reason why he has upside is because of his targets and red zone presence. And if he doesn't have the red zone presence, then mostly out on him. That being said, it is Terry McLaurin week. People are going to be way too low on him this week. I don't think that he is going to be exceptionally highly owned. As of right now, I have him at 6% owned. That's fucking bad, bros. Like, that feels terrible if you're not playing Terry McLaurin this week. I will absolutely have him in at least one lineup. I will very likely have him in all 3 lineups. At 6,600, I think he's a considerably better play than Michael Pittman was last week.
I'm MME probably. I'm doing 20 lineups MME and then building out a 3 max. I think that he's somebody that I'm going to force into like 25 to 30% of my lineups out of the 20. I mean,
yeah, I'm really really into him. I really like Washington stack. I think that like you can kind of play this game however you want, but it's worth saying that like the combined ownership for a Washington stack of Wentz, McLaurin, and Logan Thomas is only 26%, whereas for Detroit it's Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and T.J. Hawkinson at 46%, and that's not even considering.
I will say that if you like Deebo Samuel, you should like Curtis Samuel. Which you don't like Deebo Samuel. We've been over that, but like the way they used him was very reminiscent of Deebo Samuel. And I'm not saying that it's going to be like that all the time, but we have to think that they paid a lot of money for him. They worked with him in Carolina. We saw that a little bit then. You have to think that that's what they envisioned when they signed him. So, like, if you're a Deebo Samuel guy, you should like Curtis Samuel this year.
And I will say, I think that it's not that I personally think that Deebo Samuel's role is bad. I think it's incredible. And the same thing with Curtis Samuel. It's just that it's really hard to get it to project well. Because, like, even if you put, like, 7 yards per carry or something on both of them, it's like they still only get 7 rushing attempts at most 7 rushing attempts.
Yeah.
And it's really hard. It's just hard to project. I'll talk about it on a projection podcast later, but regardless.
Yeah, I just mean like if you like Deebo Samuel as a player with a role, you should really like Curtis Samuel this week. I mean, he's going to be he's the Dollar General version of Deebo in this offense. He's going to get carries. He's going to get routes out of the backfield. He's going to get targets. He's not the number 1 guy, which lowers the upside a little bit, but he's way cheaper than Deebo, which kind of like makes up for that.
I agree. Let's move on to this last game. It's the highest over-under on the slate, and then we'll get out of here. This is Las Vegas and Arizona. Over under 51. Las Vegas has the highest team total on the slate at 28.25. Las Vegas was very pass heavy. Like I said, they were tied for the highest pass rate in the adjusted script last week at 77.78%. Implied for a lot of passing touchdowns, had a lot of red zone attempts as well. They were one of the highest red zone passing teams in the league last week as well. Implied for 2.77 passing touchdowns, just 0.39 rushing touchdowns. Devontae Adams he's an alpha, right? Like, it's kind of the same thing as AJ Brown. I talked about this in the Discord, but like, it's one thing to have a wide receiver come over to your team who is not just like the fucking nuts as a route runner, right? But if you get Stephon Diggs on your team, if you get Devontae Adams on your team, if you get AJ Brown on your team, the quarterback's just gonna fucking throw to him. Because like, why would you need to look anywhere after your number one read has 4 yards of separation on whoever the fuck is being guarded by? Like, you don't need to look.
Pittman is out, by the way. I'm sorry to cut you off. I just got the update. Pittman is out this week.
God fucking damn it. That's hard. Okay, well, I don't know. Maybe
Team Hines season, fellas.
I don't know what the fuck.
Not really. But like, if you're playing that game,
that's gonna be so weird. Okay, yeah. I just think that Devontae Adams. It was so easy to see that he was just gonna go into Las Vegas and just be the fucking man. People who were drafting him as like he was making it into the second round. I could get him at like pick 15 sometimes in best ball. Like people would take CeeDee Lamb before Devontae Adams because they hate themselves, and I just don't understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I dropped Devontae Adams a little bit in my projections. I think I'm like wide receiver 5. This year, I thought that he'd get a lot of targets still, but I thought the quarterback play would affect him a little more.
Dude, Derek Carr is so good, man. Everybody.
He's not Aaron Rodgers. It's not that Derek Carr is bad. I like Derek Carr. I have a lot of Derek Carr, but Derek Carr is not Aaron Rodgers. Like I said, wide receiver 5. It's not like I was saying, hey, like you guys should not draft Devontae Adams, whatever. I just took him from 1 to 5. I thought it would affect him a little bit. I thought he was still elite. I thought that, but I didn't think he'd get 17 targets. I thought we'd see, like 12, 13, whatever. I didn't think he'd get 50% target share, whatever he got last week. Like. And if he keeps getting that, I mean, he's probably going to end up wide receiver 1 over time.
Yeah, and obviously I don't think he's going to get 17 targets, but like I do think he's gonna average 11, 12 targets a game. I just don't see a way for him to not be like he's going to rival Cooper Kupp in targets. I think almost for sure. Those guys are going to be like the ones that are fighting for wide receiver 1 target share.
The only other one that I could think of is probably AJ Brown. I think AJ Brown will also be up there.
But Philadelphia does not pass near as much as the other two. And that's the thing. Like, in terms of target share, sure, I can see AJ Brown being up there with those two guys. But I think in terms of pure targets, I don't even think it's going to be close. Like, Las Vegas is going to pass. They're going to be one of the pass-heaviest teams in the league. And I will also say that I have a vested interest in Las Vegas. I have a lot of them in best ball as well. Because I just thought they were too cheap. All of that being said, they're in a really, really good spot here. I didn't quite get through talking about all the macro stuff, but Arizona 5.5 point underdogs here, 61.54% pass rate in the adjusted script, also pass heavy in the red zone, 1.78 passing touchdowns implied. I think that Arizona looks like a trash fire. I just their off season was really shaky. They had a lot of drama. And not only did they have a lot of drama with their quarterback, but they went out and got a fucking diva wide receiver with Marquise Brown. And, outside of those two, like Rondale Moore is hurt. I think Andy Isabella is out this week too. It's fucking somebody who I've never heard of, Greg Dortch. As the wide receiver.
As a preseason guy, I know Greg Dortch.
But it's weird that like they have Kyler Murray, they have Marquise Brown, and then they have apparently a preseason guy, Greg Dortch, and then they have Zach Ertz, who I think is still very good, but is oft injured, and AJ Green, right? And like, this offense, it just seems like the gears aren't greased, and it just doesn't seem like it's going to be a well-run machine. There's probably some decent evidence that Cliff Kingsbury is kind of an idiot. And James Conner is back there, and they try to feature him and make it a run first offense with James Conner, and it doesn't work. So I don't know. I think that Arizona just has a weird identity crisis thing going on here, where like they should just be completely all in on Kyler Murray, but Kyler Murray is kind of a diva and kind of a weirdo, and maybe that's just not going to be the thing that happens, right? Like we've seen it before that quarterbacks who are very talented end up being kind of weirdos and just not buying all into playing football. It's important to remember that Kyler Murray did have the option to be a number one overall pick in baseball. Like he had, or not a number one overall pick, a first round pick in baseball. And it's fair to think that maybe he's not completely all in on football, kind of like a Ben Simmons situation. That's kind of what I'm equating this to. I think that Kyler Murray is kind of a Ben Simmons guy. Maybe just not all the way bought in. So I think that Las Vegas, in the same way that I said that I thought that the Chiefs would absolutely stomp Arizona, I think that Las Vegas just absolutely stomps Arizona. I don't think that Arizona is an offense that makes sense without DeAndre Hopkins. I think they really miss him as a clutch, like, need to get this first down wide receiver because Marquise Brown is not that guy. And I very much doubt that Greg Dortch is that guy. And Zach Ertz is still not completely healthy. AJ Green's not that guy. So I think they're going to be super inconsistent. They have the ceiling. I think Marquise Brown is a great play every single week. I think Greg Dortch proved to be a pretty good play last week. I think he'll be a good play this week. But I just don't buy that they're going to be that competitive a team. So what are your thoughts on this game overall?
So I agree with a lot of what you said, but I also think that I want to play a lot of them this week at low ownership and what could be a shootout. Um, Not because you're wrong, just because we've seen Kyler Murray and what he can do. We've seen Marquise Brown and what he can do. He didn't do it last week, but we've seen him have some real blow up games with, Lamar Jackson. We've seen Zach Ertz as a tight end have some crazy games in the past. And because of all the injuries, I think that the target tree could be skinnier. Maybe it's not, it wasn't last week, but it could be. So, I'm just hoping that in a more competitive setting where it's not a blowout, that maybe we see this offense do what we've seen it do in the past. And I'm not saying that if you build 1 to 3 lineups that you should do that, but it's just, it's direct leverage on Vegas, who is a good play. I'm going to have also a lot of Vegas, but they're also really high in ownership. And it'll let you get Devontae Adams while taking a different stand on this game. Where you play Kyler, you play Marquise Brown, you play Zach Ertz, you can come back with Devontae Adams. So if Devontae Adams has 17 targets for 300 yards and 5 touchdowns this week, but, Arizona keeps it competitive, it's kind of the best of both worlds there. So from a pure game theory perspective, I have a lot of interest in Arizona this week. But I'm not saying that it's necessarily a good bet.
Yeah, I
It's just, I think for me, just too early to say they're a bad offense, and I'm willing to bet on it again at low ownership.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I do think when I said they're inconsistent, I just think they're going to have a really wide range of outcomes. I don't think they'll be consistently good. I think that they will be more bad than good and more great than good. I just think that it's going to be either they score 30, 35 real life points, 40 real life points, or they just get fucking shit canned like they did.
Yeah, so like we talked about Nick Chubb earlier, I think for me that means when they're low ownership, I'm willing to go there in good game environments. When everyone's playing them, I probably will not.
But that's the thing. I think they'll be owned this week. I
Are they
don't.
projected high? I didn't think they were. I thought that they were not low, but not high.
Well, I mean, Marquise Brown's projected at 10% ownership, and Greg Dortch at 3,500. I think is going to be one of the highest owned plays on the slate. I think Greg Dortch will end up being like 25+% owned.
Yeah, so for me, if you're playing that stack, you have to play Zach Ertz.
I agree with that.
You play Kyler Murray, you play Zach Ertz, and then you pick one of the two. You can't play Marquise Brown and Dortch. So, Adams is already going to be high. Hollywood and Dortch are kind of high. So it has to be, if you're doing it, Kyler, Zach Ertz, one of the two. And then you could even go back and take maybe like Waller or Winfrey or Jacobs on the other side and still get something really different that kind of directly leverages that game. Like I said, if you're playing Arizona this week, it's leverage, not because you think they're the top play.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think that Arizona's fine. I don't have them projected super great. I have Las Vegas considered as the best play on the slate. I really love
Josh Jacobs also is projected decently well, right? If I remember correctly, I think Jacobs was in the model decently okay. Not amazing, but not bad.
Yeah, I have him right there with Ramondre Stevenson. I think he's okay. I just think that it's very unlikely that I end up with Josh Jacobs when there are so many good running back plays. And now even Liam fucking Hines, who I have to consider at 5,300,
I
who's
was only
right there.
asking purely from leverage. Like I said, you know me, maybe not as much as everybody else, but I'm purely a game theory guy. I mean, I do number work and everything, but like pretty much all of my decisions are based on game theory. So I'm now looking at Josh Jacobs as leverage on Vegas. Because if they score 40 points and they don't throw for 4 touchdowns, Josh Jacobs probably has a great game.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
would almost have to. So at this point, looking at this game where there's a lot of ownership and everything, I just wanted to start maybe considering Josh Jacobs as leverage there and maybe getting him in some of my lineups where I don't have any Vegas.
So Josh Jacobs is exactly the same play as Deontay Johnson this week. That's the
Yeah,
thing. Like they are different positions. The
except
exact
Deontay Johnson
same.
doesn't actually leverage anything.
Right,
Deontay
but
Johnson, I mean, he leverages ownership as a whole, but like it's not like a actual scenario that like Deontay Johnson is leveraging. I think they become a little bit better plays when it directly leverages the field on something that makes sense.
the thing is though, Josh Jacobs doesn't really leverage much either. And what we're gonna close out here in a sec because we're going over a little bit. But I do just want to say this, and we'll go back and forth a little bit on it. Derek Carr doesn't project to be over 15% owned. He projects to be like the sixth highest owned QB. Devonte Adams is not really leveraged by Josh Jacobs because Devonte Adams can get 15 receptions and 2 touchdowns, and Josh Jacobs can get 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like,
I would say Josh Jacobs is the leverage on Renfro, who is also, but you could also do Waller, like I said, but Waller's just more expensive and kind of takes away. But Waller's not as high as he should be. I mean, like Waller didn't have like a great game last week. But, I mean, he's definitely the 1B option there. Like I said, I mean, my take on it as a whole in lineups is that I'm probably going to play Vegas. I'm just going to try to take pieces that aren't as high. I'm going to have a lot of Devontae Adams, but I'm probably not going to play a lot of Renfro. It's going to be like Waller and um, I don't know. I don't even know who the other guy is there, but I'm not going to play Adams and Renfro together.
Waller
That's where
projects as more ownership than Renfro.
really.
Yes.
See, I haven't looked. That's why I don't build until Sunday morning. Because I haven't looked today, but when I looked last time, Renfro was like high for some reason.
Nah, 12% owned. Renfro.
That's
Waller,
good.
Waller
That's good
projects
for the field.
16.
It's good for the field because if you played Renfro over Waller, when Waller's lower owned, you're probably an idiot. But
I tend to agree with that, but one way or another, I think there are a lot of ways to go about this slate. I think there's a lot of ways to go about different stacks. So we'll close things out here with talking about probably the stacks we're most interested in. So I'll let you go first, and then I'll go afterwards, and we'll close things out.
I mean, I think for me, my top three is Vegas, Washington, and Jacksonville, and it's not necessarily close. Both Washington and Jacksonville is pretty low owned compared to the ceiling that I think that they have. Washington is direct leverage, not direct leverage, but kind of leverage on Detroit because they're both like cheap stacks that like, if they're people are playing Detroit, they're probably not going to have very much Washington unless it's in a full game stack, which the field doesn't game stack really for some reason. So like that doesn't really matter. Um, but like I said, I also think that Arizona is okay. I think that Denver is okay. And I think that New Orleans is okay. And I'm also not mad about Baltimore. I know that you're pretty big on Baltimore. My off the wall stack would be the Jets because they throw so much. It's not likely that that's going to happen. I probably won't play any, but like if I saw the Jets win somebody $1 million, I also wouldn't be totally surprised.
I will not be flag planning on the Jets, but I understand why you would say that they are.
Like I said, I'm not playing them. I don't have any Jets, but like if
I get it.
I know,
I
I
get
know.
it.
I'm just saying though. But like if I saw the Millie Maker and it's a Jet stack, I'd be like, I get it.
My top stacks are going to be Las Vegas, Baltimore, and Washington, like pretty much for sure. I do like Jacksonville. I'm fine with Denver. Probably the off the wall one that I like the most probably gonna be Atlanta. I don't know why I wouldn't be into Atlanta. And then a really weird thing here that now that Michael Pittman's out, I think that if you really wanted to party hard, play a Jonathan Taylor and Liam Hines lineup. Like, I think that they don't have receiving options. And Neem Hines and Jonathan Taylor are by far their best offensive pieces now. If Indianapolis is going to move the ball, they have to use them both. So, in the Millie Maker, throw that out there. I think it's kind of a weird thing. But with that, we're going to close things out. Thank you guys so much for listening and for tuning in. This is a weekly video podcast breakdown thing that we do here at PaydirtDFS.com. Thank you, Hess, for joining me this week. And
Absolutely, I love being here.
yeah, I'm gonna get models updated and everything like that with more recent injury news and get some final runs up. If you guys are not subscribers over at PaydirtDFS.com, you should go subscribe. There are models and range of outcomes and DFS and betting models for nearly every single sport that you can play. And join the Discord. It's free. You can find it over on the site, and you can always ask me questions if you have them. Also, last thing, if you have not picked up the new Theory of DFS course for the advanced players, you should go pick it up. It has a lot of really cool tools that I built that can really enhance the way that you build out lineups. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. My name is James McCool. I've been joined by David Hess, and I hope that you guys win all the money this week. Adios.
I will tell you.